Why not kill the wife? I know that's sort of a morbid question to start the video on, but it's the question I've had since first watching the original John Wick, and it's a question that is indirectly asked multiple times throughout the series.
It's just a fucking car, just a fucking dog.
And why can't we just correct the problem?
Because my fucking nephew killed the dog.
All of this for what? Is a sabachki?
No one understands why John would be going on such a bloody rampage because some assholes decided to kill his puppy and steal his car. And chances are good that they probably wouldn't be so confused if it was the wife who was killed instead. But it wasn't. Helen died of some vague terminal illness completely unrelated to everything else that's happened in these movies. And in any other action flick, I bet it would have been the wife. It only makes narrative sense for the thing that gets the hero back into the criminal life to be the death of what he left it for. But this isn't any other action flick. This is John Wick. The little action movie that could. The Keanu Reeves-led stunt work showcase that everybody expected to be an average B-movie at best, that is now almost 10 years on, widely considered to be the peak of modern action cinema. Famed stunt coordinators Chad Stahelski and David Leitch decided to hop into the director's chairs for the first time and give us a lean, thrilling, and all-around mesmerizing piece of urban mythology, with Stahelski himself going on to do it 3 more times. And Stahelski has been fairly open about his ultimate intent in making these movies.
I think the end of the day is just, can you sit somebody down for 96 minutes? Can you put our little touch of urban mythology on it? And can we entertain you and just go, wow, I didn't waste 2 hours of my life. To me, that's the most important thing. Did you see something slightly different that entertained you?
The goal is entertainment, giving you something fun and interesting that you will overall enjoy. Something that doesn't care a whole lot about making you think or making any kind of statement or exploring any kind of deeper truths. There's no great character psychology or complex motivations. Stahelski and Leitch were stunt coordinators, not directors, not writers. The vast majority of these movies are the big action sequences and set pieces, gunfights, and hand-to-hand combat. That's what you go to watch John Wick for, is the violence, the insane and sometimes hilariously absurd choreography. You don't go for a deep, emotionally complex story. And my bread and butter on this channel is the emotional complexity, the character psychology, the complex motivations. So you might be asking yourself, why am I even making a video about these movies if they don't have any of that? And it's because of that initial question I posed. If all of that is true of John Wick, why not kill the wife? It would certainly be much easier to think of from a writing or directing standpoint. It would make as much, if not more, narrative sense. And while we joke about it, can you really tell me that you would have so much less sympathy for John if it was his wife instead of his dog, that you would like the movie considerably less? But they chose to kill the dog, a dog that becomes an explicit symbol of hope in the face of loss.
In that moment, I received some semblance of hope.
John is on this revenge quest not because of the death of love, but because of the death of hope after love. And that seems to speak to some level of thematic intent. It's a decision that would take some measure of narrative thought. And that's the strange space that John Wick has always occupied as a franchise. These movies are primarily action showcases, but within these movies are surprising moments of seeming narrative and thematic intent. Ideas that pop up from time to time that may fall away soon after, but always leave a lasting impression. And so today, I'm asking a very simple question. Does John Wick mean anything? More to the point, what does it mean for something to have meaning at all? Does art need to have some greater purpose or message beyond itself to be meaningful, or is the simple joy of creation enough reason to create? And I think the best way to start answering that question is to look at the man himself, the boogeyman, the Baba Yaga, John Wick. John Wick is a badass. I put it so simply because there's not really a way to make it more complex. That is what he is. He's skilled, efficient, a man of focus, commitment, and sheer will. He more than knows his way around a gun or any other object that could conceivably or inconceivably be used as a weapon. He's the man you send to kill the boogeyman, death's very emissary, the absolute best at what he does, and nobody in these movies would even begin to argue with that. He doesn't go around with quips and one-liners flying out of his mouth. He's not ever trying to alleviate tension attention or look cool or have fun. He's just trying to get the job done, and if you try to stop him from getting that job done, he will get you out of the way. And yet, that's not the character we're introduced to at the start of the first movie. At the beginning of the first John Wick, we're treated to an in media res scene of John alone and bleeding out. He takes out his phone to watch a video of him and his wife on the beach, and while the video's still playing, he lays down on the ground ready to give up and die. From there, we cut to the past, to a man living alone in a house awash with deep blue, a bathroom sink abandoned, a woman in a hospital bed, a coffin being lowered into the ground. This is long before we see John start shooting and stabbing his way through the streets and nightclubs of New York City. This is long before we see exactly what he is capable of, or even have any hint of it. All we've seen him do is bleed out, give up, and lose the love of his life. All we see him do at the beginning of this movie is be powerless and vulnerable. And then a puppy named Daisy is delivered to his doorstep, a gift from his late wife, who tells him in a letter that he still needs someone to love. One of the primary philosophies that Chad Stahelski and David Leitch had while working on this movie was to root the action and the stunt work in story, character, and most of all, emotion.
We paid way more attention to the drama and to the storyline and to the performances because we felt as first-time filmmakers we're going to be judged by that. And also, an action movie without a good storyline is pointless.
The way that they thought about action was always story, story, story. They've been watchdogging that from day one and trying to bring out all of the emotion that is in this piece.
When I think about some of my favorite action movies, I think of stuff like Die Hard, Terminator 2, or Mission Impossible Fallout. And sure, I think of John McTiernan's expert use of space within a frame to build tension. Sure, I think of the incredible chase sequence between the Terminator and the T-1000 through the waterways. Sure, I think of the Halo jump and Henry Cavill cocking his arm guns. But before I think of that, I think of John McClane telling Al to tell his wife that he's sorry just in case he dies. I think of John Connor finding his first real friend in a cyborg. I think of Ethan Hunt sacrificing a very important mission in order to save a friend's life. John Wick knew that incredible action can only get you so far if the audience doesn't care about the why of that action, if your characters don't feel human, if the decisions they make don't have any kind of emotional or personal stakes, if the hero doesn't feel in one way or another vulnerable. If we don't first see John in this vulnerable state, if we don't see the human side of this character, the action, however skillfully choreographed or shot or edited, is going to fall flat. That drama isn't necessarily there for the purpose of some greater meaning or message as much as it's there to give the action a foundation and weight. And all of that doesn't come just from the screenplay or the direction, it also comes, perhaps even mostly, from the man himself. John Wick is a character that could have been played by pretty much no one but Keanu Reeves. The character and the actor have become so synonymous that if you ever had to recast the character for any reason, you might as well not even bother. And I'll let the directors tell you why.
Keanu is uniquely empathetic as an actor.
Keanu brings a more emotional side to most of the roles he does. He's never played something that's hard as nails or the absolute Terminator of killers. He's always got a more humanistic side to him.
And it's hard to pull that in any other direction, which was great for Wick because we could create this guy who is a monster but likable. The way Keanu's playing it, you never lose that empathy for his mission, no matter how scary or ruthless he is.
You can say what you want about Keanu Reeves' acting abilities. Personally, I think every time he speaks in these movies, it sounds like he's gone so long without speaking that he's not 100% sure how to do it anymore.
You're not very good at retiring.
I'm working on it.
Yet through Keanu's performance, there's always a sense that John is thinking, feeling. There's always something going on behind those eyes. It might not be something we quite have access to, but it's something we know is there. And I think it's that, paired with the awkward, stilted way he delivers his lines opposite actors like Lawrence Fishburne and Ian McShane chewing up every last bit of the scenery, that elevates the role far beyond what's on the page. John Wick is quiet and calculating, but that's not to say that he isn't human or without any kind of personality. Keanu gives him this kind of awkward demeanor, a sense that he doesn't really know how to interact with these people all that well and doesn't really care for small talk or pleasantries.
Never want to waste words.
He never seems like he quite feels comfortable around other people. He never quite feels like he fits into any given picture, like he's trying his best to imitate the way everyone else acts to middling success at best.
Have you returned to the fold? Just visiting.
But that's only when he's not behind the barrel of a gun. When John's fighting, shooting, killing, he suddenly knows exactly how to carry himself, exactly how to operate, exactly how to move, and exactly what to do. He suddenly becomes a force of violence and precision. It is here, moving through this process, that he seems completely comfortable. The funny thing about John Wick as a franchise is that despite its penchant for bloodshed, the films themselves have never seemed all that enamored with it. John doesn't seem all that enamored with it. There's never a focus on blood or gore or carnage. There's not a lot of big explosions. The closest you get is when John gets his hands on a shotgun. The focus is never on the result, but on the method, the process, the rhythm. Just take, for example, the film's ever-present love of the reload. Or this hilarious scene in John Wick 3 where he literally takes the time to pull these guns apart in order to shoot just one bullet. Or how everyone and their mother freaked the hell out when John killed this guy with a damn book. There are steps to this process: aim, shoot, reload, repeat until dead. Unlike with conversation and human interaction, there are easily followed rules and very predictable consequences. If you shoot someone in the head, they will die. While these movies don't take much, if any, pleasure in the actual result of John's actions, the blood spilt, it certainly does take pleasure in the process, the choreography, the skillful ways in which the camera moves and the editor cuts to capture that process as clearly and cleanly as possible. There is a simple joy in watching it unfold, watching John execute each and every step of the process in quick, purposeful succession. And it's that love of the process, the steps and the rules that come to define John Wick as a story. Another question I had when watching the original John Wick was, what if a normal person walks into the Continental? My guess is that the Continental is probably also just a normal hotel for patrons who aren't a part of the criminal underworld, but the movie never bothers to say that explicitly. In any case, it wasn't a big deal. It didn't affect my experience of the movie at all. It was just a quick thought I had, since the Continental seems to be so specifically for people like John Wick or Miss Perkins. But then, at the very end of John Wick Chapter 2, I got an answer. There are no normal people in John Wick, at least not in any way that matters. Any civilians are practically just set dressing. They might as well be props, walls that bullets can't pass through. And if they're not that, they are secretly members of one faction or another in this world. The homeless of New York City are a whole faction themselves, led by hands down the best character in the franchise, the Bowery King.
With pigeons.
Yes, you see rats with wings, but I see the internet.
Cops are a non-issue for all these supposed criminals, and we know that from fairly early on in the very first movie.
I'll leave you be then.
Every violinist, ballerina, priest, sushi chef, and taxi driver is an assassin or has some other connection to this world. As far as I can tell, the one and only person we know for sure wasn't a part of it was Helen, and she's dead. And I think the very insular nature of this world, its distance from our so-called normal one while still being very much a part of it, is what makes this world so oddly compelling. While it's so familiar, it's also so incredibly different. While it exists in such close proximity to our own, there's nothing from ours to get in the way. There are no cops to complicate things. You don't really have to worry about civilians getting caught in the crossfire. It has its own currency, so real-world money's not really an issue. There don't even seem to be any actual victims of these criminals. They're too busy shooting each other to commit crimes against anyone else. The world of John Wick is exceedingly simple and is very careful to not let anything get in the way of or overcomplicate the act of John Wick killing some folk. That is the entire point of these plots, is to give John Wick an excuse to kill some folk. Anything in between action scenes is just necessary footwork needed to either strengthen the emotional stakes or justify the next action scene. That's why the world is full of vague exposition. What was John Wick's impossible task that got him out of this world originally? We don't really know, and probably never will, because at the end of the day, it doesn't get us to an action scene. That information doesn't facilitate John killing killing some folk. And the world itself is built on that narrative philosophy. This is a world of easy to understand rules and codes that lead to simple and violent consequences, whether followed or broken. If there is any obvious theme in the franchise, it is the idea of consequence. If you do business on continental grounds, you are labeled excommunicado and your life is forfeit. If you give someone a marker as sort of blood pact, they have to do something for you, usually kill someone or help you kill someone, with the agreement that you will eventually do something for them, usually kill someone else. And if you refuse to do whatever they ask of you, you will die. That's the situation John finds himself in during the second movie. Because of his actions in the first film, a man named Santino D'Antonio shows up with the marker John gave him to help with his impossible task. Santino wants John to kill his sister, Gianna D'Antonio, so that he can have her place at the high table, a very vague group of people who hold authority over basically everybody in this world. John got his revenge, got back his car, even got a new cute little puppy. He was ready to go back to his life outside of this world. He pours concrete back over that hole he dug up, convinced now that he won't ever need what's in there again. But before the concrete has even dried, Santino is at his front door asking him to do this. It's as Winston told him plainly in the first movie.
You dip so much as a pinky back into this pond, you may well find something reaches out and drags you back into its depths.
Santino was that thing, and here he is now to drag him back down.
I didn't want to do this, John. Had he stayed retired, I would have respected it.
Actions and consequences. John rejects the marker, refuses to even hear what Santino wants him to do because he doesn't want anything to do with this world now. But because of that rejection, Santino blows up John's house and is completely within his rights to do so. And because of that, John realizes that he has no choice but to accept the job, hoping that maybe he'll be able to leave once it's done. Actions and consequences. He gets his suit and his gun, he heads for Rome to complete the act. He finds Gianna, who, desiring to go out on her own terms, kills herself in reaction to John's presence. Gianna's death causes just about everyone to come after him. John escapes, but he's not done yet, because in trying to tie up loose ends, Santino puts out a contract on John for $7 million. And in reaction to that, John decides to go after Santino in order to kill him. Actions and consequences. John pushes past every obstacle, all the people out to kill him for that $7 million. No matter how many people Santino throws at him, John just keeps coming. Santino seeks sanctuary in the Continental, where no blood can be spilled. John finds him there, gun in hand, tired and exhausted after all of this. Santino taunts him, knowing he can do nothing. Winston tells him to just walk away. He leaves, goes back to his burnt home. He looks almost ashamed of himself, of the rage that led him to do what he did, and he must know. He must know that while he says he finished it, he's finished nothing. He spilt blood on continental grounds, and that action comes with consequences, just as every action has. The world of John Wick may have been built for the sole purpose of giving John a reason to kill some folk, but it ends up becoming something more, something tragic even. John came back to this world because it was the only way he knew how to deal with what happened to him, and now, no matter how hard he tries, he can't get back out. If he chose not to kill Santino, he still has a contract on his head, and he would still have to deal with assassins coming after him. Either way, he's screwed. There is no way out here. Suddenly, by necessity of the story and the character, the thing that lets John Wick shoot some folk for our entertainment becomes a prison for John Wick himself. A never-ending cycle of violence and revenge and chaos that he can never escape from through any avenue but death. These stories suddenly become about how when you build a world on transaction, punishment, and death, eventually everyone loses. And I know there's going to be people who hear me say that and tell me you're just overthinking it. It's not actually that deep. It's just an action movie. Hell, I get those kinds of comments from people talking about movies and games much more explicitly meaningful than John Wick. And the thing is, those people may be right. I may be overthinking it. It may not be that deep. It may very well be just an action movie. But surely you've learned by now that for every action, there is a consequence.
I've been in service for over 40 years.
Under the table, serving the table. Everything is under the table.
Out of the first 3 movies, John Wick 3 is the one that seems to be the most explicitly about something, specifically concerned with the nature of authority. As John is on the run from the high table and any assassin looking for a $14 million payday, any faction he goes to for aid, any individual he goes to for help must confront their own relationship with authority. What do they stand by? Who are they loyal to? What are they being told is meaningful versus what do they actually find meaningful themselves? Take, for example, the character of Sophia, the manager of the Continental in Casablanca. John comes to her in his search for the Elder, a sort of mystical figure that is said to be the only one above the table. And he presents to her a marker that she gave him a long time ago. John took her daughter and hid her away in an attempt to keep her safe from this world. The only thing is that John's marker doesn't hold any power now. Since he's excommunicado, Sophia doesn't have to honor that marker. In fact, if she did, she would probably be punished for it, maybe even killed. And yet,
This is your blood. Your bond. When you needed help, I was there.
John pleads with her to look beyond the authority the marker had and to see that the bond they made with it is worth more, means more, than whatever arbitrary authority it may have stood for. And Sophia, albeit begrudgingly, agrees to help John. It's a scene that serves as a nice microcosm of what John Wick 3 is doing. Where John Wick 2 was about the constraints of working under the powers that be and the rules they've instated in the name of supposed order, John Wick 3 becomes about questioning the very nature of that authority when it fails you. Asking what matters more, John being excommunicado or the fact that when Sophia needed help, John was there. The marker itself may not hold any power, but what it symbolizes, what it means, that still does. Even though the ones who had the marker made might not believe that it holds any power, to the people who use it, it still very much does. Perhaps meaning isn't solely decided by some shadowy organization of underworld mob bosses or assassins or authors or critics or scholars. Perhaps meaning is decided by those who experience that meaning. Perhaps meaning is the inevitable result of the process. John Wick 3 is a movie of people facing or trying to escape consequence, the results of their actions. The adjudicator moves through this world to each and every person that has helped John Wick and punishes them. She takes away Winston's power over the Continental because he gave John an hour to escape after killing Santino. She stabs through the director's hands because she gave John passage to Casablanca. She gives the Bowery King 7 cuts for the 7 bullets he gave John to kill Santino. All while John is desperately searching for a way to appease the high table. And in an attempt to kill John, the adjudicator goes to an assassin named Zero, whose students are all highly trained, literal ninjas. As of this point in the series, he's probably the biggest threat we've seen John face. And yet, he has a very interesting relationship with John.
I gotta tell you, I've been looking forward to meeting you for a long time. I'm a huge fan. John Wick.
It's such a strange shift. I really wasn't sure what to do with it when I watched it for the first time. It felt like a joke, and I think it was meant to come off as comedic, but it felt like Zero was making a joke, not the movie. But I think it's actually indicative of Zero's character as someone who doesn't seem to realize, or at least doesn't recognize, the results of what he does. This is very much just a game to him. This doesn't give off the impression of 2 highly trained killers fighting to the death as much as an up-and-coming actor getting to work with one of his heroes. And when the final fight between John, Zero, and Zero's students comes, that attitude is very clear. Both Zero and his students get more than enough opportunities to kill John, and yet they never do. They always give him an opportunity to get back up until eventually he's killed all of Zero's students and is left with just Zero himself. And Zero fights with the smile of a little kid throwing a pass to their favorite football player. He's having so much fun getting to work with someone he so admires and looks up to. While he does acknowledge that he has to kill John, that doesn't seem to be his main priority. He's just having fun, embracing the joy of the process for as long as he can. Or at least, that is until John gets the upper hand, takes Zero's sword, and plunges it deep into his torso, leaving him alive but fatally wounded. For a moment, they sit together, and Zero tells him in labored words,
That was a pretty good fight, huh?
John gets up, picks up his belt that he used in the fight, and walks away.
I'll catch up to you, John.
No, you won't.
I feel like, just as with the scene I talked about before, this is intended to be comedic. It reads like that to me, but I also can't help but find it to be a little sad, as Zero just slumps to the floor and dies with no fanfare, not even dying in an interesting or over-the-top way, just a sword through the chest. I feel a measure of sympathy for him. He so enjoyed the pleasure of the process, so loved the action itself, that he neglected the reality of the final result. John and Zero are both masters of death, as Zero says, but only one of them was willing to acknowledge what that death really means, the permanence of it. The person who won was the person willing to face the consequences of their actions. As someone who analyzes stories like this as a job, every conclusion I come to is paired with another voice in the back of my head asking, are you just overthinking it? Are you putting meaning into something that doesn't really have it? Basically, everything that goes into these videos goes through that questioning in my head many, many times. I consider possible counter arguments, every possible way that what I'm saying could be misinterpreted, or every possible way that I'm placing meaning somewhere it doesn't really belong. Maybe I'm meant to laugh at Zero just slumping over like that. Maybe it's supposed to be just a joke. And as a perspective writer myself, I worry from the other side of the coin too. Will what I'm writing be misinterpreted? Am I sending a message I'm not intending to send? Does this have any actual meaning, or is it just hollow and pointless? And in that, what I see in this fight, the end of Zero, is a simple truth. Meaning is derived from the act of creation. It is not a separate entity, a being that judges a work worthy or not of its presence. The joy of the process itself exists not in the current absence of meaning short of the result, but in the feeling of meaning as it is formed. And to neglect that final result, that final meaning, is to neglect the joy of the process as well. It is to neglect the reason we create art, tell stories at all. Not to make a statement or send a message, but to experience that which cannot be simply described. An action cannot exist without its consequence. Now, was all that intentional? Was everything I've talked about in this video, from Keanu Reeves' awkward performance to the nature of Zero as a character, intentional? I don't know. Frankly, I didn't look that hard for an answer. I didn't look for some quote where Derek Kolstad or Chad Stahelski said that the world of John Wick was meant to be a statement about the cycle of violence. Because to me, that's the wrong question. The question isn't, was all this intentional? The question is, would it matter if it was? Would that intent be the thing to make it meaningful? Would the lack of intent mean that what I see here is wrong? And I don't think either of those two things is true. I don't think it's up to Derek Kolstad or Chad Stahelski or Keanu Reeves or anyone else what this means to me or to you and why you care about it. Because that meaning is up to you. Even if you don't know quite how to articulate it, that meaning can still be experienced, still be felt, and that can be enough. Do you think John Wick is about the cycle of violence? Sure. Do you think it's all a big metaphor for Greek mythology? Why not? Do you think it's just an entertaining story where a guy shoots some folk and that helps you forget about your problems for a little while? That's fine too. Maybe nobody else sees why John would do all this for a puppy. Maybe all they see is just a dog. But to him, it was everything. The death of hope after love. At the end of the first John Wick, we return to that in media res opening as John is on the ground, dying, ready to give up after he's killed all the ones responsible for the death of that hope, as the video of his wife continues to play on his phone.
Come on, John. Let's go home.
He gets up, refusing to die, and he breaks into the building near him, an animal clinic. He uses their tools to at least stop the bleeding and give him a chance to live. And he finds a dog scheduled to be euthanized. He opens the dog's cage and takes him home, finding meaning in something that everyone else had given up on, a reason to go on. That, to me, becomes the entire point of John Wick. Finding reasons to go on even when struggles feel endless. Finding meaning in places no one else sees it because to you, it is a reason to go on. Believing that meaning lives not in the objective reality of what we can prove, but in the subjective experience of what we feel. Hanging on to life for the hope that there is something, someone else to love. Maybe that was intentional, maybe not, but it's the meaning I feel, and that's all I need to know. So, let me slightly amend my original question. I've given my answer, but I can't give you yours. What does John Wick mean to you?